Dana, I want to show our viewers at home what this all means here. You've got about 50% of the workforce of the Department of Education impacted by this decision. How does that break down based on the employees right now? Back on Inauguration Day, January 20th, you had 4,133 employed. Now you're down to 2,100, and it's just right smack down the middle, 2,183. Who are these employees? How do the numbers break down? Simply put, they laid off more than 1,300, but earlier, a few weeks ago, that about, well, close to 600, 572 who took the early retirement package, okay? And then they had 63 who were dismissed. So that's what you're left with, right? So if you go back to, well, this number here, from Inauguration Day to where you are now, this 2,100 number, it's possible they could be absorbed into other departments in the U.S. government, which would, in effect, fulfill Trump's promise of trying to shut down the Department of Education. However, you're going to need congressional approval to get to that point. But as of today, that's where we are, the numbers on the board. Back to Dana now with more.
All right, and joining us now is Republican Senator Jim Banks. He's a member of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Great to have you here. Want to play for you this call for one. This is Democrat reaction to some of these layoffs. Watch here.
I have enormous concerns. Essentially giving notices to half of the department is not keeping that department functioning. It's going to have enormous consequences to families.
People use the Department of Education to fight for the rights for their children. That would be deeply disappointing to them if they didn't have anywhere to turn.
Governor Tim Walz, he said this isn't about fixing bureaucracy in Washington. This is about defunding your local public school. But I don't know if they understand how public schools are funded. Sir.
I guess you could say that President Trump and Secretary Linda McMahon are dropping the people's elbow on the bureaucracy at the Federal Department of Education. And Dana, it's a long time coming, because consider that the average bureaucrat at the Federal Department of Education makes over twice as much money as teachers in Indiana do. And when you talk about the $100 billion budget for the entire department, think about the schools that you could build, the teachers you can hire. That's what President Trump is doing. He's sending these dollars back to the states so that they can spend them in a much wiser and more effective way than the federal government can. This has been a long time coming. You're right. Congress has to cement it. We should eliminate and abolish the department and make these cuts permanent and let states keep that money instead of sending it to Washington,
So we wanted
DC.
to show the results of 4th grade reading trends and 8th grade reading trends. This ain't good. Look at that yellow line right there. That is below basic, and you see how it's on the rise since 2019. A lot of that could be a COVID impact, but the trend hasn't stopped. Now, here's the 8th grade reading trend. Look at the yellow line again. It's really the same trajectory there, up to 33% that are below basic reading on the national trend. Let's go back to 1982. Remember this guy? Watch.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education and by eliminating ineffective subsidies for business.
That now today. Will Congress allow this to happen?
Well, Bill, let me tell you where reading scores are going up in states like Indiana, where we have one of the best school choice programs in the whole country. We empower parents, we let teachers teach, we get the government out of the way of these schools, and that's why abolishing the Federal Department of Education is so good for our public schools, because it empowers them to do their jobs better without the federal government getting in the way. Over the years, we've seen Republican presidents and Democrat presidents pass bills like Common Core and Race to the Top, No Child Left Behind, that have bloated the federal role in education. Now it's time to unwind it. That's what President Trump is doing in Congress. I'm going to do everything myself to help President Trump get it done and cement it and empower schools at home to do their jobs.
At least No Child Left Behind was focused on the students. None of these protesters are focused on the students. And one of the things that is going to be pushback against the Trump administration and people in Congress that support abolishing the Department of Education is something Democrats are saying today, which is the Department of Education is tasked with protecting disabled students across America. And Jamie Raskin, for example, is all out there saying, how are you going to defend this? So let me ask you.
Well, I think it's simple. That will be done at the state level. A federal bureaucrat who's in Washington, D.C. can't protect schools and kids in Indiana. That has to be done at the local level. And getting the federal government out of the way and letting schools take care of these issues with those tax dollars that will be spent, more tax dollars spent at the local level will help that happen in a much better way than anything that happens in Washington,
Jim
D.C.
Banks, the Hoosier, thanks for coming on today. We'll see where it goes, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move education into the states so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education. Linda McMahon is a real professional, actually a very sophisticated business person, and she cut a large number, but she kept the best people. And we'll see how it all works out.
The Department of Education is set to lay off 1,300 employees, a move that the new Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, says is the first step toward shutting the department down, altogether. Let's bring in Fox News contributor and former Reagan Education Secretary Bill Bennett. So your former boss, Ronald Reagan, said in the 1980 campaign and again in the 1982 State of the Union address that he wanted to shut down the Department of Education. He never did it, but I'm wondering, is it finally time to put it out to pasture, with the caveat, of course, that you can't shut it down without the cooperation of Congress?
That is correct. You need the Congress. It was created by Congress, and you need the Congress. Now, what she is doing, I think, is fine, if indeed she is saving the best people. Most organizations, it's 30% worker bees and 70% drones, not the flying drones, drones in the sense of bees. You remember those drones, the male bees who don't do much. I'm not saying that's the case in the department. Okay. But, interview people. Don't use the chainsaw. Use the scalpel, the paring knife, the scissors. I interviewed, 100 people a week my first few weeks, and we got rid of people that way. It's just hard for me to believe that she knows who the best people are. It's right that you could probably get by with 20% of that staff, but you got to carefully do it by going through who's working and who's not.
So here's what she said about the reduction in staff. She said, quote, "Today's reduction in force reflects the Department of Education's commitment to efficiency, accountability, and ensuring that resources are directed where they matter most, to students, parents, and teachers." It was pointed out earlier today on Fox that a lot of the staff members at the Department of Education make more than teachers who are on the front line. So is that money better spent taking it out of staffing salaries and throwing it out there to the states where the teachers can use it?
Well, I think a lot of the money can go to the states. And, of course, most of the money does go to states. Only 10% of what we spend on education is from the federal government. But there are a couple of very important federal functions. I wrote about this with a colleague recently in an open letter to Linda McMahon. You've got to be able to assess how the country's doing, how the states are doing. The president's been citing these numbers, and you got to get these numbers from somewhere. Everybody knows about our reading and math scores, John, how far down they are. We know that because the National Assessment of Educational Progress, housed at the Department of Education, tells us. That's very important. Then you want to send the money out to the states, fine, but let's evaluate how the states are doing. I had something called the wall chart, and at the end of each year, we took every state, we put a chart up there and said how they were performing. They dreaded the wall chart. They hated the wall chart, the states. But it was an honest assessment. So give a good assessment, block grant a lot of the money out. Let's see who thrives and who doesn't. And then let's take the best practices for the states that thrive and give those practices to other states to imitate.
Yeah, Bill, it's almost like you were reading my mind, because here's what the National Assessment of Educational Progress found in 2024, that among fourth graders, only 39% of them were proficient in math. Eighth graders, 28% of them were proficient in math. In reading, fourth graders, 31% were proficient. Eighth grade, it declined to 30% proficiency in English. We spend more per student, as the president has pointed out, than all but 4 countries. Yet we rank 31st in outcomes. I mean, we should be top 5 at least, if not number 1.
And we can be. Notice the progression is downward. The longer you stay in school in America, the dumber you get.
The worse it gets, yeah.
And that shouldn't be. That. Think of what happens in college, God knows. But that absolutely shouldn't be happening. But we do have examples of success, John. We do have some idea of what works. We do know how to teach reading, for example. A lot of people are doing it the wrong way still. We do know how to teach math. So let's get those best practices up there for everyone to see. But meantime, education is in the hands of parents and the states. And there's a big revolution out there because now you're at a tipping point. Almost 50% of the states will more than 50% of the states will soon be able to provide parents the opportunity to choose whatever schools they want their kids to go to. That's a great opportunity. The schools have to respond by offering solid content. Choice is good, but it's not enough. Content, solid content.
Well, Ronald Reagan couldn't shut down the Department of Education because Democrats controlled Congress through both of his terms. Well, at least the House they controlled. The Republicans have the House, but the Senate's quite another matter. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed being on with the other Irishmen.
I'm Scottish. Shh. All right. Jackie.
Well, I meant the Taychuk. I meant the Taychuk.
Oh, him. Yes, of course. All right. Thank you, sir. We'll see you again soon.
Straight talk to the Irishman. You know, that's very interesting.
I love it. Okay. Appreciate it. We'll see you again soon.
The Trump administration carrying out massive layoffs at the Department of Education. 1,300 people were let go. It's about half of the agency's workforce. The president spoke about this and what he plans to do earlier today. Watch.
Now, Department of Education's, maybe more so than any other place, has a lot of people that can be cut. They're, number one, not showing up to work. Number two, they're not doing a good job. We're going to move education into the states so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education.
Let's bring in Alina Habba, counselor to President Trump. Alina, great to have you here. Let's just put up some of these numbers that the president is trying to fix here in call for number 4. The nation's report card of passing scores. You've got fourth graders. Only 31% of them can read at proficient level. Only 39% can do math where they're expected to be. Look at 8th grade. 30% can read at the level they should be at for 8th grade. 28% can do math at the grade 8 level. These are such sad numbers, Alina. So how is gutting this Department of Education going to help increase these numbers and make everybody feel better about education in America?
Well, let's be clear. Gutting the Department of Education is an important part because it doesn't mean that just because there were numbers of people that were employed by the government that there was more focus on education. I want to be very clear on that. What we've seen is actually that despite the fact that we had such a tremendous amount of people, such a huge building and infrastructure in D.C., that nothing was actually getting translated to our children. I am a mom of a 9, 11, and 17-year-old, Martha, as you know. I have seen this for myself. I have tried to put them in private school. I have seen kids go through public school. It doesn't make a difference. Our education program is actually broken. And we should not, as America, as one of the leading countries in the world, have the lowest education numbers for our students that aren't even able to read. So we're going to give it back to the states. We're going to let the states have more control. Moms have more decision-making power. Dads have those decision-making power. And try and get our children up to snuff to where they should be.
It's just amazing that we've put up with this for so long and been okay with it when we all have seen how badly deteriorating our education system is. And when you have kids in high school, I read about a boy who graduated from high school with like a BA average, and he couldn't read. So we're just pushing kids through without caring whether or not they are where they need to be. Randy Weingarten, who, obviously the unions pushed Jimmy Carter in 1976 to create a Department of Education. We didn't even have one before that. And a lot of the unions have had so much sway at the White House, which you well know, Elena. Here's what she said about this. A gutted department will mean fewer teachers, more crowded classrooms, increased mental health and behavioral challenges for students, increased absenteeism, decreased graduation rates. I mean, those are all the things that we have been seeing, with the Department of Education intact.
Yes, yesterday I spoke at a Maha Moms panel with Secretary McMahon next to me and Secretary Kennedy, and we spoke about these issues, and we spoke about the sedentary lives of children, the depression amongst children, the issues with children gaming, not outside, not studying. They're more into social media. This is a real issue in this country that has to have a grip. And no, it doesn't mean teachers won't be employed. We're talking about government agency that is not doing their job by regulating those teachers. And we need the numbers to be up. We want our children to thrive. That is what we want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I never understood why the Department of Education, when they were, fully funded and fully intact, why they weren't taking on social media in the classroom. Why weren't they starting a campaign to say no phones in the classroom? Yeah. Let's unwind all of this. But they never said a peep about kids staring into their phones or eating gummies here in New York before they go to class. So,
exactly.
Alina, thank you very much. It's a shakeup that we hope will have great results for everybody. Thanks, Alina.
Thank you.
The Department of Education getting a dose of DOGEing. The agency slimming down its workforce by half, giving 1,300 career employees the boot. Trump's handing the chalk back to the states.
We have a dream, and you know what the dream is? We're going to move the Department of Education. We're going to move education into the states so that the states, instead of bureaucrats working in Washington, so that the states can run education, where the parents of the children will be running education, where governors that are doing a very good job will be running education.
But Democrats are crying foul as they watch their beloved cash cow for union jobs get butchered. The one that squandered $1 trillion and left a trail of kids with nothing but crummy test scores. Of course, the teachers union boss is furious.
The federal government does not control education. The states do. Local school boards do. This is about opportunity. That is why so many people are so mad about it, because they're just taking opportunity away from kids that don't have it. So billionaires, kids of billionaires, they have it. They go to private schools. Everyone else, 90%, go to public schools. Don't take away their opportunity.
So let's stay on the facts.
Sorry.
No,
I'm
do
really
not apologize.
angry about this.
No, because this
I'm
is what
really
people
angry.
need to.
All right, Judge, how at this point can you defend the state of public education in America?
The progression has been downward since we got to the point where the federal government got involved. And make no mistake, the Constitution does not grant the federal government authority over the schools. And the 10th Amendment also says specifically that powers not delegated to the federal government, as in education, is up to the states. All right, so let's get that legal piece out of the way. Then what you do is you say, kids are getting worse every year. 39% of fourth graders are not proficient in math, 31% not proficient in reading. Eighth grade, 28% can't do math. I mean, this is crazy, or can do math. So in the end, they're going to argue that this isn't fair to the kids. This money does not go to teachers. This is about grants and programs and monitoring those grants and sending money out to their favorite educational project. And it's got nothing to do. And for this woman to fight for students, the woman who had the opportunity to open schools when they got billions to COVID-proof our schools and couldn't find one metric, one reason to open the schools. And now she's got the unmitigated goal to say, oh, our students, you could care less. Go back to Ukraine and do whatever you do in Ukraine, Randy.
Dana, have you heard an idea from Randy besides spend more money? Any idea at all to improve scores?
Well, no. And the other thing is, I don't hear them concerned about it.
No.
Like they're concerned about the Department of Education being cut, but as we've pointed out, and they've started to point out, they're like, but wait, local governments already do that. Okay, well then fine. Then what's happening at the Department of Education? Why doesn't anybody care? There are some things that they do, and Linda McMahon, the secretary, said would continue. Mm-hmm. For example, it's possible you could take the Pell Grant program, which a lot of people like, and say that helps lower income students go to college. So you could, why isn't that at the Treasury Department? Like you can take the student loan program, which has got problems. You could take that over to the Treasury or the Commerce Department. Like there are things that can be done to deal with that. They also are complaining that it's the the Education Department that defends disabled students. You could do that at the Justice Department. So all of those things are possible. Our public school system used to be the envy of the world, and now we are a laughingstock in the world. And President Trump is saying we can't allow that. I'm going to add one other statistics that you guys might not have seen. Jason Riley today in the Wall Street Journal reports that since COVID, well, before COVID, chronic absenteeism, which means missing 10% or more of school, was at like 28%. Now it's at 34%. So over a third of the students in New York don't go to school 10% or more. And you think that your kids aren't going to pay for that for the rest of their lives? Absolutely, we all will. But I would say if the Democrats really want to save the Department of Education, don't put Randy on TV. Take her on. Go after them and say, you are not doing what is the fundamental right of every person in this country, which is to get the education that they deserve. Why do you think people are pouring across the border with their kids? Because they get the constitutional right to be educated here. But even that is not going to be good enough for the fate that awaits us if we don't change.
If they did take on Randy and the unions, they might not get donations, though. Maybe that's what they're afraid of.
Who is Randy?
Weingarten.
Where?
Lady.
Oh, I thought that was a fat Gary Shandling. R.I.P. Gary's not really alive. It goes back to just politics in general. How much real estate does politics take up in your life? It should only be like one room in your giant house of stuff. But the Dems have injected politics in every single room in your house of life, including education. You're supposed to be able to make the decisions and protect your kids from stuff in school. Instead, they said no school choice. You can choose your abortion, but you can't choose your own school. You can't do anything about your kids if they're being, groomed by perverted teachers. If you go to a school board meeting, they'll come after you. This is why DOGE works, because it has none of these phony tropes. It's presented as is. Here's the program. Here's the cost. Here's what it does. Here's what it doesn't do. It's impossible to protest unless, of course, the protesters are paid. Harold. But we can spot it now. You can't trick us anymore. You can't take our money and not give us something in return. So I think Americans like this stuff because they respond to clarity. And the Democrats are having a problem because they've never had to sound out their ideas because the media never expected that from them. So they just agreed with them. So what you're seeing and what you saw this woman melt down is their ability to provide any coherent defense has atrophied. And that's what you saw right there, a screaming Mimi.
Well, usually you'll be able to point to results and say,
yes.
well, we did this, we did this. But they can't even do that. Harold, do you still really want to quadruple the size of the Department of Education?
I do, and I'll tell you why.
Oh, boy.
So hear me out, because you all have said a bunch of things, and there's a lot of passion behind what you're saying, but a lot of it's just not true.
Here comes the bite.
So let me give you a sense, give you a guess. What percentage of money do you believe in our public school system, on average, in every state, is spent by the federal government, Judge? What percent of the? So I'll give you 7.8% in public education, K through 12, comes from the federal government. The state, on average, is 46.8. Local governments are 45.3. Local and state governments establish academic goals in schools. They adopt and approve budgets. They approve expenditures. They set the school calendar. They hire and supervise the superintendent, and they approve hiring of all personnel, including teachers.
So then why do we need a Department of Education?
Because what the 7.8% does, Judge, some of it's higher ed stuff, and some of it is feeding poor kids lunch.
That's
Let me finish.
No. That comes from other.
You're wrong. You're wrong. Let me just finish my point. You're wrong. That comes from the Department of Agriculture, the breakfast. Lunch comes from there. They also help school districts deal with kids who have disabilities, mental and physical. I know these numbers are uncomfortable. I'm for what you are for, which is helping our schools get better. But what you're saying doesn't make any sense because all the decisions are made at the local level. The reason I think the Fed should have more of a role, Greg, if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to say if we do it and the Fed screw it up, so be it. The reason all those things you talk about, Dana, so well when you had that person on DP last week, and I made the comment about Louisiana, their schools really suck, so their reading went up. That's great. But they were at such a low level. These decisions are being made at the local level. The money comes from the local level. The only point I make, you can differ with me and say the Feds may do a worse job, but I know this, the people in charge now, our students are getting a raw deal because of what we have set up right now. I'm not saying the federal government will do it much better, but I know this, they can't do it any worse than what we're doing right now. That's why I made the point I made last week.
It's interesting to me that we have the same goal,
right,
and we have the complete opposite way of getting there. I actually appreciate your point of view that it should be bigger, that you could do more and they deserve more. But then you could. I also see my point of view, which is it's not doing what it needs to be doing. So therefore, why not push it back the other way?
It should, but Dana, it already is that way. 94% of it is there.
Then we don't. If all of these other things can be done at other departments, then maybe this department's
because
not.
I believe Department of Treasury, we could divide their stuff up. We could divide the Department of Defense up. This is a national concern and challenge and purpose and function, I believe, much like defense is. So they have to have local partners to do it, but the federal government ought to be involved in making sure kids can read, whether they live in Louisiana, California, New York, Tennessee, Georgia, or New Jersey, wherever it may be.
Education flourished for most of our history without a Department of Education that you and I both know was created by Jimmy Carter to say thank you to the teachers' unions. Let's be straight about why that was.
In 1980, we have a lot of tariffs to talk about.
Jesse, in 1980, the Nation at Risk study came out. They had to have years of study before that to get the data.
Harold, a two-word solution for all of this. Child labor.
Got him.
You always nail it.
You always encapsulate it.